fabulous YouTube Astrology Academy. Welcome. Thank you for being here. I am your facilitator, Nadiya Shah, and I feel very grateful, very privileged to have the opportunity to teach this class to you today. I especially want to extend a very heartfelt burst of gratitude to the one and only Stormie Grace for inviting me to teach at her school. So let's jump in here. We are looking at Synastry, which is also known as relationship astrology. Here are some things that we're going to be talking about today. You are going to learn what is Synastry astrology. We are going to look at key planets and aspects to help us to understand how this other person brings different parts of you forward and vice versa. And we have lots and lots of celebrity examples that I'm really looking forward to as well. Now, as far as a prerequisite goes, my first book is called Astrology Realized, and that book is a foundational understanding to how to read astrology charts. It exposes you to the language that you need as you are starting off. You don't have to have read that book, but if you have the basic knowledge that I present in that book, well, you'll be able to keep up with this class with absolutely no problem. Now, anytime I do teach a class, I always like to take a moment to set an intention. And this could be something as simple as just taking a breath, taking a moment right now, and to allow yourself to be in this present moment. It is with breath that we actually experience the infusion of spirit and matter. And it is with breath that we actually experience the present moment itself. And it is in the present moment that the most powerful learning can take place. So whatever else may be going on in your life, I'm going to invite you to take a moment right now to close your eyes, to take a deep breath, and to ask yourself, what are your hopes for this time that we'll share? What inspires you about this topic? And what energy do you bring to this moment? And as you find your answers, connect to them deeply, knowing that they will guide your learning journey from here. And as you find your answers, and as you are inspired, feel free to share some of your unique answers below in the comments. Now, for me, what inspires me about this topic is learning about relationship dynamics ultimately helps me to learn about myself. Learning about how it is that I relate to another person ultimately allows me to use the best that we have that connects us. But also, I do believe that every relationship is an opportunity to see ourselves differently. As I like to say, to see yourself differently is reflected in the eyes of another. Now, that doesn't mean you take on somebody else's opinion of you as your own, but it does mean that we get a real opportunity to see whom it is we are as we relate to another. That is the mirror there that can fuel healthy self-knowledge. And for me to facilitate that in someone else, well, I feel very inspired by that. So what is Synastry astrology? Let's jump in here. Essentially, Synastry astrology is how your planets speak with the planets of another person. You have your own birth chart. You have your own natal chart. So does everyone else. And for that matter, so do countries, so do cities, and so on. Any entity has a birth moment, and that is what the chart represents. How your planets are communicating with their planets, well, that's what we're looking at when we look at Synastry astrology. Now, one of the easiest ways I'm going to invite you to consider Synastry is to consider this other person as a transit. And what I mean by that is, if you have that foundational understanding to astrology, you know that, for example, let's say right about now, as I'm recording this, Pluto is at 27, reaching towards 27 degrees of Capricorn. So let's say you have your sun at 27 degrees of just about any sign. But to keep it simple, let's say another cardinal sign. So your sun is at 27 degrees of Aries. When Pluto gets to 27 of Capricorn, or any planet gets to 27 of any sign, that planet is communicating with your sun, if only for a period of time. And that's essentially what a transit is. A transit is an awakening of one of your core energies by a type of conversation that a moving planet may be having with that planet at the moment of your first breath. So that's what a transit is. Now, let's say you meet another person, and that person's sun is at 27 of Capricorn. Well, their sun is communicating with your sun. Now, some types of conversations are going to be more dominant than others. Easy conversations are what are called trines and sextiles. These are energies that are either of the same element or complementary elements. And so these are lovely energies. They bring out the best in both. Now, sometimes you'll have what's been called a hard aspect or a challenging aspect. This is usually a square, an opposition, sometimes a conjunction. And the thing is that we tend to feel and become aware of the hard aspects more than the easy aspects. So you meet somebody, their sun squares your sun. Well, there's going to be sparks, there's going to be electricity. But at the same time, there's going to be tension there, which can sometimes fuel the motivation to get along or to understand each other that much more. And so in this way, when it's a hard aspect, you're going to feel it that much more closely than you might if it's an easy aspect. But all aspects do come into play. Now, some aspects are going to be more dominant. That tends to be the more challenging aspect. But also some aspects are felt by one person a lot more than the other. Consider this. The ancients believed that the further away a planet was and the more slower moving it was, well, that energy becomes that much more dominant. And so let's say you have your moon. The moon moves pretty fast. Takes about 28 and a half days to go all the way around the zodiac, meaning 28 and a half days to go all the way around your chart. And so wherever your moon is in your birth chart, that is a deeply personal placement, which is why it is one of the personal planets, along with the sun and Venus and Mercury. Mars sometimes also is considered a personal planet as well, although it is kind of on the border, if you will, along with Jupiter. Okay, having said that, your moon, fast-moving moon, personal planet, very close. You meet somebody and their Pluto is aspecting your moon. In that conversation, that Pluto is much stronger than the moon. And so that person's Pluto is being experienced by the moon person in a way that the Pluto person does not know. Okay, if this doesn't necessarily feel graspable right away, don't you worry. We are going to go through each of the planets, and we are also going to look at celebrity examples. So we've got a lot of fun and learning ahead of us. Now, outer planet transits to personal planets are always more dominant, and especially felt by the personal planet person, and hard aspects are felt that much more than easy aspects. Okay, some additional considerations. This class does focus a lot more on planets. However, you do want to take the nodes into consideration. I tend to think the nodes are so important where it comes to understanding those soul level connections. In fact, it is the nodes in your birth chart that speak to what the soul desired to do before it incarnated. That's how I understand the nodes. Now, the planets speak to what we want, why we want it, how we go about getting it. When you meet somebody whose planets are aspecting your nodes, well, in some way, they're going to be part of awakening your unique journey, your soul promises. And I do believe in a more meta sense, we are ultimately here to move towards the more full embodiment of greater love and greater wisdom. That is part of what the North Node represents. And so you meet somebody, they have a planet conjunct your North Node. Well, that person is going to awaken through people, places, things, situations, feelings, your openness and your understanding of what your unique path towards greater love and wisdom may be like. You meet somebody, they have a planet conjunct your South Node. Well, this is going to be a person who awakens some very deep-seated feelings within you. Perhaps a person who awakens an understanding of very old patterns or past patterns, if you will. But they give you a chance to understand what perhaps you want to move away from. Now, if you want to know more about the nodes, I have an entire book on that called The Universe is Wise and Loving, and I hope that you enjoy that. But know that in this class, we are going to take the nodes into account to understand the karmic journey, which is sometimes different than the conscious journey that two people might take. Synastry can apply to anything. It can apply to your relationship with a country, with a city, to a business. It can apply to your relationship with your parents or friends or coworkers or bosses. However, for this class, we are going to focus a lot more on love relationships and look at synastry related to love. Aspects to the angles are going to be very important. Now, what are the angles? Here on screen, you will see the chart of the very lovely Issa Rae. Now, if you look at this chart, let's imagine it's your chart. You are at the center of that chart. When you take your first breath, you become connected to everyone and everything at that moment of birth. The spirit enters the body, and your relationship to the planets around you speaks to your place in the cosmos at the time of your first breath. Now, it is the point all the way to the east, what we call the ascending sign, in this case for Issa Rae. It is 13 degrees of Taurus. That is her ascending sign. And that to the ancients was conceptualized as the entryway for the breath to enter the body. Remember, you are at the center of this chart. And so the ascending sign, which is the most easterly point at the moment of your first breath, has always been considered important in just about every system of astrology I've come across, although sometimes understanding the point of the ascendant or how to interpret the ascendant can be slightly different. Now, if you look all the way to the west, here for Issa Rae, we are looking at the western horizon, which is 13 of Scorpio. And that is where we begin the 7th house. The ascendant begins the 1st house. And that is the most westerly point at the moment of the first breath. If you look at the top of her chart, that is where we see the midheaven, which for Issa Rae is 27 of Capricorn. Wow, she's about to have a really big year, right? With Pluto moving over that midheaven for her, moving towards and on top of, stationing on top of in 2022, her part of fortune. So be on the lookout for Issa Rae. She's going to be doing big things and going through big changes as well. Now, that particular, I just talked about a transit there, but that particular midheaven is the zenith of the zodiacal sky at the moment of your first breath. And it is the gateway to the 10th house. So you can see here so far, I've talked about the most easterly point, the most westerly point. If we divide the chart in half, we have the surface of the earth. Above the earth is all the planets you see from houses 7 to 12. Below the earth is all the houses you see from 1 to 6. Now, if we go to the lowest point in the sky at the moment of her first breath, that is the cusp of the 4th house. In Issa Rae's case, that is 27 of Cancer. So these are the angles, and they are gateways to the 1st, 7th, 4th, and 10th houses. If someone else has a planet, one of their birth planets in one of these houses in your chart, well, that is a dominant and important placement. Even though for this class we are emphasizing planets, I want you to take note of what's happening near angles. That becomes a more dominant energy, a more dominant archetype they awaken in you. Okay, let's jump in with the planets. We are going to start with the sun. And so the sun is an invitation to bring forward your very best. And if you meet somebody who has a planet that is speaking to or aspecting your sun, well, in one way or another, they are going to encourage you to tap into that part of you that is here to shine bright. They're here to encourage you, sometimes easily, sometimes less easily, to bring forward your very best. Now, with the sun gets a lot of attention, and this is the part of you that can get a lot of attention as well. Now, sometimes we get attention for things we really like in ourselves, sometimes not so much. Where it is that suns are aspected, So again, this could be your sun in an easy aspect to one of their planets. Well, depending on the archetype of that planet, let's say, for example, Mercury, off the top of my head, even though we're going to go through all the main planets here. You look at Mercury. Mercury is mind, is communication. If someone else's Mercury is trine your sun, you're able to shine that much brighter and bring forward your very best through conversation and communication with this person. But let's say it's a hard aspect. Let's say it's a square to your sun. Well, this is a person with whom you may not always have the easiest conversations. It may feel difficult to talk to them at times, or it may feel like you say things and you didn't realize what you said and it provokes particular reactions. Well, in that case as well, you get a chance to understand yourself more deeply and to understand how it is you want to move towards and what work may need to be done to move towards your very best. In the best possible scenario, having harmonious sun placements will magnify each other's charisma, each other's happiness, and the energy of success itself, depending on how you uniquely define that. And sometimes you meet people, if they have harmonious aspects to your sun, you feel like you're able to be your very best in a way that you like with them. Hard aspects, a little bit more challenging than that. The moon. Okay, the moon, I think, in my humble opinion, might just be the most important placement to consider where it comes to understanding love relationships, because the moon is being comfortable with this person. The moon represents feeling at home with this person. Does this person really understand you? Is there a meaningful emotional connection? Well, that is what the moon is going to show you. Where we see long-term couples, now I do want to be a little cautious as I say this, because people get into relationships for all kinds of reasons. There is a very famous study that was done by Carl Jung. And Carl Jung did a study along with his assistants where he was looking for signatures in successful long-term marriages. And he asked his assistants to look for moon conjunct the ascendant, moon either in trine or opposition to the sun, Venus conjunct the ascendant. So some very classical synastry aspects in the context of love and romantic relationships. Well, the thing is, his assistants could only find about 30% of the charts had one of these love-related aspects in marriages. Now, why is this? His study already right out of the gate had a huge presumption, and that was as to why people get married. People get married for all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with the moon or Venus, right? People get married for reasons that have to do with Saturn, as we're going to talk about, that have to do with Mercury. Some people get married for friendship, that's Mercury. People get married for stability, that's Saturn. So there's all kinds of reasons that people get married, and it's not about judging it at all. Marriage can be whatever you want it to be, and a long-term relationship can be whatever it is that you want or need it to be. But when we consider the definition of a successful relationship, true emotional understanding and emotional connection, it is the moon that you want to take into consideration. How at home do you feel with this person? And can you create a home with this person? I remember a very, very long time ago looking at a particular chart, and this woman was telling me about how she's been with this person long-term, but he's not living with her, and how he comes and goes. And I looked at the chart and I saw how their moons were just not communicating. We're not getting together. And that was a very powerful reflection of how it was that these people were finding it challenging to create a home, to connect on a level of home. Now, again, that doesn't mean that if you are in a relationship with someone and you're living with them and your moons are not aspected, doesn't mean that you're not living together. But it just means that it becomes a little bit more, or sometimes a lot more of a challenge to find a real sense of ease and comfort and creating a home that both of you can feel good about. So I do think that the moon is perhaps, if you're looking for a love relationship of real emotional understanding, the moon is likely going to be one of the most important symbols that you're going to explore. Mercury, I mentioned earlier, Mercury is friendship, very simply put, and it's the ability to talk to this person. Now, for some couples, that's more important than others. If you've got a lot of air planets in your chart, well, chances are you want somebody that you can talk to. But if it isn't the case, like let's say your chart is a lot of water and a lot of earth, how you connect to another person is going to be a lot different than someone who's got a lot of air, for example, or a lot of fire, for example. And again, we'll look at celebrity examples in just a moment. As a general principle, though, Mercury has to do with feeling like you're with somebody who's a friend, or perhaps in harmonious connections, a best friend to you. How much do you like talking to this person? How much do you feel you can talk about? How interesting is this person to you? How do they awaken you on a level of intellect and on a level of mind? Is it easy to talk about really hard things or not? Or is it that the conversation tends to stay superficial? You know, there are people who are the strong, silent type. That works for a lot of people in terms of a relationship, and for others, it doesn't. Mercury is going to point the way. And it's what you like to talk about also. Look at Mercury. Mercury in aspect to Neptune, let's say, in harmonious aspect. One person's Mercury in harmonious aspect to the other person's Neptune. Well, the Mercury person is going to be thinking about and talking about dreams and fantasy and romance and, oh, wasn't that romantic, right? Now, let's say Mercury is in hard aspect to Neptune. Well, that can bring with it uncertain feelings, uncertain thoughts, if you will, and a sense at times that maybe this person isn't really someone you can talk to. Well, that's okay, right? All relationships have their mix. And ideally, when you look at a synastry chart, you want to see a mix of easy and hard energies. If it's all easy energy, well, the person can feel like a sibling, a little bit too much. There's no spark. But if it's all hard energy, well, this is a person where you could end up feeling really tired, really exhausted. And so in order to find a more meaningful, balanced connection with somebody who challenges you at times, but also challenges you in ways that still help you feel loved and supported, you want a mix of energies playing out. Now, Venus gets a lot of emphasis when we look at synastry, but essentially Venus is how attractive do you feel? Do you feel desired by this person? Do you feel like they look at you and they like what they see? It's how easy and gracious the interactions can feel. How social are the two of you? Whether it's social together, or is it that you two don't really socialize with others? So this is where we're looking at Venus as well. When we look at flirtation, we're also going to look at Mars in just the next slide, but Venus you can consider is a more receptive principle. She's about attraction and you feeling worthy of having and attracting the love that you desire. How much joy do you experience? How much fun do you experience with this person? Do you have things that you like to do together that help to fuel the connection between the two of you? Some of that is going to show up in the context of Venus. Now, Mars, in contrast, is a more active principle. It's what you like to go after. So this is the attraction factor. And what that means is, does this person turn you on? Now, I think if you are looking for somebody where you want the physical connection to be an important part of it, well, you want to have Mars aspected in one way or another. Way back in the day, so I've been a full-time astrologer for over 15 years now. Way back in the day, when I first was starting out, I remember I was filled with inspiration and ideas. And the very first class that I conceived of was a class called Chemistrology. So the astrology of instant attraction is what I like to look at in that class. And Mars was, of course, a huge factor that we explored in that class. Now, since then, and this was a lot of years ago, I first explored that particular topic and I first conceived of it. Since then, I have taught that class as a talk, as a full day workshop, and more, really all over the world. And so it's wonderful how things can come together in their own time. Having said that, though, Mars, so important when we're looking at that spark. What turns you on? What is it about this person that propels you to them? If a physical connection is important to you, you want some type of connections playing out where it comes to Mars, even if it's a square, even if it's an opposition, even if their Pluto is conjunct your Mars, it's okay. Some type of connection indicates that physically you feel deeply connected to this person on a level of passion, on a level of attraction. And that is the pull that you might feel towards them. Remember, Mars in your own chart represents, yes, what turns you on, but also your own sex drive as well. How does it come forward? Well, how does this person awaken your sex drive? That's what aspects to your Mars are going to show you. Jupiter. Okay, so Jupiter is, how big does this relationship feel? How optimistic, how over the top? Does this person encourage you to overindulge in ways that are unhealthy? Or is it that they bring forward your confidence? They encourage you to believe that great things are possible. Does the presence of this person bring about an awareness of your blessings, or on a practical level, do they open blessings to you? That is part of what Jupiter is going to show you. Now, I wrote here, get the party started, because Jupiter is infamous for being the life of the party, right? Is this a person who brings that life of the party energy to you? Do they bring it in a way that feels supportive and mutually shining? Or does it feel as if this person is encouraging overindulgence in certain things that maybe you don't want to always be indulging in? That's what Jupiter is going to show you. But of course, Jupiter tends to represent optimism and hope, and where it is that this person may encourage you and infuse your life with genuine hope, well, that can be part of it. How is it that this person helps you to feel fortunate? Do you feel fortunate for knowing them? How do they help you to feel blessed? Do you feel blessed for knowing them or not? These are some ways in which the energy can come forward. Saturn. Now, I actually consider Saturn the most important planet where it comes to understanding long-term commitment, because that's what Saturn represents. Now, if you've got hard aspects of Saturn to another person's personal planets, well, it can sometimes feel difficult to wrap oneself around the fact that perhaps this is something to commit to. And what I mean by that is some people inspire commitment in a very easy way. That's the easy aspects, where you meet them and you feel like, yeah, I could be with this person. I could marry this person, or I could be in this person's life long term. I could be in a relationship with them long term. But sometimes you meet people and they make you very aware of what commitment could mean and how it comes with varied responsibilities. So whether it is they make you aware that you have your own responsibilities you've got to address, and maybe you're not sure you're ready for a committed relationship, or maybe they make you aware that, okay, if I were to commit to this person, here's what's great, here's what's really not great. Is it worth it? So they encourage you to evaluate. Now, every relationship involves sacrifice. Many sacrifices we are going to make willingly because we see the benefit to it. And so, for example, to be in a faithful relationship means necessarily that you are going to forego other partners. Now, many of us will take on that commitment very gladly. We're happy that we found somebody that we feel we can feel faithful to. For others, though, that may feel like more of a sacrifice than they are ready to make, and that's okay as well. With Saturn, we often see harmonious placements of Saturn in couples that are together for a long time and are faithful to each other, because that is a big part of what Saturn also represents, being truly practicing fidelity with this person or not. Well, how you feel about that, how willingly you take that on, how much do you really feel this person brings stability in your life or not? Well, that is what Saturn aspects are going to show you. Uranus. Now, Uranus is either the revolution or the revelation. When Uranus is a revolution, this person changes you from the inside out, without a doubt. You in some way are feeling as if you've been turned inside out. That revolution can feel like, oh my goodness, all of a sudden everything's got to change. just as a result of meeting them. Now, if it's a revelation, this person brings in fresh energy, new ideas, new ways to see yourself that feel easy, that feel light, that feel encouraging. In one way or another, this person is going to encourage you to be free, to lighten your load in some way, to understand yourself and your unique individuality your own way as well. Now, this is a force for change. Sometimes changes come about in ways that feel thrilling and exciting and fun. And sometimes change comes about in ways that is really challenging, that is difficult, that may not necessarily be easy to integrate. The nature of the connection of Uranus, especially to a personal planet, is going to point the way. Now, Neptune, in its best understanding, Neptune is faith and inspiration. It's also romance and candles and all the different ways in which you may feel very swept up by this person, swept up in a moment. But it can also be uncertainty, and it can be one of those energies that feels rather draining in some way, where it feels like whether it's your own peace, your own resources, well, it can feel like that becomes elusive in some way, or that in some way you end up giving a lot to this person in a way that doesn't always feel easy. You want to look at the nature of the connection. Hard aspects of Neptune can also indicate that you may have, and if you're the personal planet person, well, the personal planet person has heightened expectations that perhaps the Neptune person cannot meet. Or even with the best of intention, the Neptune person ends up disappointing the personal planet person. However, as I said, in its highest, best manifestation, this is feeling a soulmate connection with this person, feeling like they are a dream come true, a fantasy made real. And finally, Pluto. Now, Pluto is intense, without a doubt. And Pluto is also a force for change, but it changes you from the inside out. It helps you to acknowledge your own power, but it's also a profound bonding with this person. Now, the best of Pluto has you meeting somebody and they help you to see things in yourself that you like. They help you to make positive changes. And it may not be direct. It could be absolutely indirect. Just you having them in your life helps you to feel stronger and different and more clear and more aware of your power and excited about exercising your power. However, a hard aspect from Pluto can bring with it power struggles, even power games as well. Now, where it comes to an aspect to your personal planet and Pluto, the Pluto person can seem like they have more power. And so the Pluto person is experiencing a connection with another person. Let's say, I used the example earlier of Mars. Let's say you've got your Mars squaring another person. Well, that relationship is going to be experienced by the Mars person very differently than the Pluto person, because Pluto is the furthest out planet and the slowest moving planet, major planet that we use in astrology. Just about any planet Pluto aspects, well, is receiving that energy. That Mars person is experiencing an intensity of bond, whether it's a square or a trine, especially on a physical level. They're experiencing a physical attraction that, all else being equal, that Pluto person may not necessarily be experiencing. And that's okay as well. Sometimes Pluto is aspecting your Mars, or your Pluto is aspecting their Venus or their moon, and it can end up balancing out in some way. Sometimes that isn't the case. And that's true for pretty much all of the major outer planets. I mean, I'm thinking about Saturn here, just to go back a bit. Let's say you meet somebody and their Saturn is aspecting 2 or 3 of your personal planets. But let's say that your Saturn is not aspecting any of their personal planets. Well, you're just not going to be experiencing the same level of commitment or the same considerations. I would also add, because I know that someone's going to ask, what about outer planet connections to outer planets? Well, that tends to be much more generational. And so everybody around your age, let's say your Uranus aspects their Pluto. Well, everybody around your age is going to have an aspect of their Uranus to everybody around the age of this other person, to their Pluto. You do want to take house placements into consideration, of course, as well. Now let's jump in because we've got a lot of celebrity examples to look at that I hope illustrate and help you to understand that much more how to understand Synastry astrology. And so here we have the example of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. They've got quite a story going back over 500 years or so now. And their story is one that has been made into many an entertainment over the years, including very famously and most recently the show, The Tudors, which I think was 4 seasons and fully 2 seasons were covering the romance of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII was married. He met Anne Boleyn. He wanted to marry her. And this was part of the motivation of how the Protestant Reformation and the Protestant religion was able to take a hold in Europe. I mean, that's the massive consequence that their relationship ended up having, was that up until their relationship, England was Catholic. And then they meet, the Catholic Church wasn't going to let King Henry VIII get a divorce. So he comes across this other religion that says the king is the head of the church, and he decides he's going to go with this new religion. Now, that's a very simplistic way to put it, but let's just say this had world-changing consequences, and I don't say that lightly, absolutely. It was their relationship that put England on a whole other trajectory and a whole other pathway. The Protestant ethic is very different than the Catholic ethic, and their approaches to so many things, including colonization, was starkly different as well. So I will take my nerd hat off, my history nerd hat off for a moment. Let's just look at their relationship. Yes, it was a relationship with huge global consequences in the bigger picture, but their connection in particular. Now, a few things that do stand out to me as I look at this. We see here Anne Boleyn in the outer circle. And you see here, she's got all these Libra placements, right? Libra placements in King Henry VIII's second house. The second house is self-esteem, self-value. Yes, it has to do with money as well. And it was actually Anne Boleyn that said, hey, these Catholic churches are taking so much money, but if you're the head of the church, you should be getting that money. So that was part of some of the influence that she brought, but also consider that Henry VIII has these Aquarius placements. He's got lots of Gemini placements as well. And so we see aspects playing out there between their air energies here. What we also see here is Anne Boleyn's nodes, right? Look at Anne Boleyn's nodes. Her north node is almost exactly, off by a few minutes, but both at 22 degrees of Capricorn. Her north node is conjunct his Uranus. We also have her south node conjunct his sun. So this would have been a bond she would have felt very powerfully. The nodal person is going to experience those conjunctions much more profoundly because it awakens the nodal person's karmic journey in a way that isn't always the case with the other, with the planet person. Now let's look at King Henry VIII's nodes. We've got harmonious aspects from Neptune, harmonious aspects from Anne Boleyn's Venus as well. So we see here harmonious connections to his nodes playing out, which is that sense of awakening that could have been transpiring for him. At the same time, though, we see here her Uranus in his 7th house. So she absolutely was not only a revelation, but a force of revolution in his life. I mean, he dramatically changed his relationship and his understanding of his marriage as far as meeting Anne Boleyn. It made him aware of love and how to change his understanding of love and partnership dramatically differently. So she absolutely was that revelation that facilitated a revolution. So there are a lot of aspects we could be looking at here with that much more depth, with that much more meaning. But we have quite a few charts to go through, and I'm going to invite you to look at this in terms of layers and how different ways of understanding can start to play out here. Now, if we look at Saturn, so basically another nerd hat history moment. A few years after they were married, King Henry had her killed on trumped up charges. But she did give birth to Queen Elizabeth I, and Queen Elizabeth I ended up being one of, some would argue, the most important queen or monarch in the history of England, in the ways in which she changed England and came to define England to this day in some cases as well. But yes, he had her beheaded, essentially. And he went on to marry a total of 6 times. Okay, let's move on. Now, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. I have lived in Mexico for 9 years now. It is my adopted home, and it is very much a home of my heart. I love it here very, very much. Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera are very loved here, and they are on the money, on some of the money, and their art is all over the country, really, but especially here in Mexico City, where I now reside. Now, Diego Rivera is very beloved and known within Mexico and respected around the world. But Frida Kahlo is an icon of Mexico, just in a whole other way, on a whole other level. You see her face everywhere. You see her on t-shirts, on aprons, on coasters. In a way, she has become so strongly identified with Mexico to the international mind when they think of Mexico, in a way that Diego may not necessarily be. So Diego Rivera was an established and successful artist, very respected in the Mexican artistic community. Frida was more up and coming, and Diego saw something in Frida that he really believed in. He loved her for the person that she was. However, Frida was very ill and used her, or rather channeled her frustration around her health and the many surgeries she had to have into her art, which made her art take on a greater depth and really resonate that much more deeply with people really around the world. But he gave her validation. So it was really because of his belief in her that she was able to establish herself and make herself known that much more as an artist. However, history is not necessarily that kind to him because he was not faithful. And yet some people believe and say that even though she felt betrayed by his infidelities, she was not able to be with him physically. And that was part of the reason why he was not faithful. Okay. He believed in her. That's the key here. He helped create stability and success in her life without a doubt. Their studios were right next to each other. You can still drive and see it. And there's a little bridge, and every morning they would connect on that little bridge and exchange loving words and hugs and kisses. And then they would go off into their respective studios to create art all day in their own spaces. Okay, so here, let's look at the synastry here between Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera. We have here, first of all, nodes on the angles, okay? So Diego Rivera's nodes are in Frida Kahlo's 1st and 7th house. That is her awakening to herself. A karmic connection is there that ultimately helps her to understand what matters to her most and what matters to her first that much more closely. And there can be a very strong past life connection with somebody whose south node falls in your 7th house as well. But also consider that we have here Pluto, Diego's Pluto, inner 10th house of success and world recognition or wider recognition. Look how close that Pluto is to her moon. And his Neptune as well, mighty close to her moon also. even though their moons are in the same sign. So they had that level of understanding where emotionally they had very similar needs. The fact that we've also got his Pluto, his Neptune right on top of her moon, this must have been such a powerful, overpowering relationship to her in particular. Now, we do here have as well, we look at his Chiron, her Pluto, mighty close to his Chiron as well. Her Venus on his Chiron. Now, her Venus is going to feel that Chiron that much more. Venus is receiving that Chiron energy. We didn't specifically talk about asteroids in this particular presentation. But Chiron is feelings of vulnerability. It's feeling exposed. It's feeling as if you become aware of where you might feel less than. And so for her, a lot of her art represents and reflects how she felt not beautiful, not attractive, not feminine, because of his infidelity. So there was that wounding that took place there. There can also be healing that happens with Chiron Venus connections as well. But in her case, we know very famously there was some wounding there. And he must have felt that very deeply as well, considering that her Pluto is on his Chiron. Now we have here, when we look at his ascendant, we've got so many of her placements right on his ascendant, right on his Saturn as well. In particular, I'm looking at Jupiter. He was born, Diego Rivera was born with ascendant Saturn conjunction. He was going to work hard in this life. He was going to make his mark, and he did. He has very famous murals all around the country, but in particular here in Mexico City. Her Jupiter falling on that Saturn awakened that part of him that wanted to be immortal, that wanted success, but also helped him to feel good about himself, helped him to feel very optimistic. With Jupiter so close to his ascendant, she brought blessings into his life as well. Now consider as well, her North Node is in his first house, so close to his ascendant. Her South Node, therefore, because the South Node is always directly across the North Node, is in his 7th house. Both of them having these similar connections. This was a very karmic, very fated alliance that helped both of them not only become more of whom it is they believe themselves to be, to embody their identity more fully, but also very likely the relationship itself must have felt very karmic and likely went, through many lifetimes to this point. I wonder where they are now in terms of their lifetimes. Okay, John Lennon and Yoko Ono, also a very powerful alliance as well. John Lennon, of course, very famously a singer in the Beatles. He met and had a relationship with Yoko Ono. Now, there were people who sort of vilified her and said she broke up the Beatles. I think people do whatever they want to do. And I think that people, especially someone of his status, our partners reflect us in some way. Now, sometimes they reflect where we are. Sometimes they reflect where we desire to be. And I think she reflected his desire to move towards something different. It was what he was ready for, and it was what he wanted. Now, look at these charts. One thing that stands out to me here, well, look, we see a lot here, right? A very powerful connection here. We have got her Uranus on his ascendant. That alone is massive. Her Uranus on his ascendant, she brought dramatic change in his understanding of who he was. And it changed how people saw him as well. I mean, with Yoko Ono, he was doing nude photo shoots. He was showing this new image of the father, this nurturing father. There's a very famous story. His first son that he had before Yoko Ono was essentially abandoned by John Lennon. And he grew up very poor with his mother on welfare. He became a drug addict. And he talks about the pain that he felt seeing his father celebrated as this modern father with the baby that he had with his new wife in magazines, and he's with his mom and they're on welfare. And so that was a story that always sort of stood out to me. She brought about a revolution and a change within him where he modernized, which is part of what Uranus is about. Now consider as well her Saturn so close to his moon. So he must have saw stability within her, and he must have felt a sense of a deep commitment, perhaps a deep obligation, but certainly he felt like whatever he might be sacrificing, he took it on completely. It encompassed him. And so she brought about a greater sense of stability, a greater sense of fidelity that he must have felt with her as well. Now, we also consider here that he's got his Venus on her south node, very powerful past life lovers type of awakening there, especially for her. We see here that his north node is mighty close, right on her ascendant, his north node on her ascendant. So that again is her awakening to herself and her own power as well. All those placements of his in her first house, we would see that also. Their part of fortunes are mighty close. Now, part of fortune is where the universe sort of works overtime to bless your life. With a little bit of attention, you can unlock blessings there. Their part of fortunes are so close, even though they're in different signs. Her part of fortune is on the galactic center. Now, I know I'm pulling in other techniques here. Some of you will be familiar with the galactic center, some won't, but the galactic center is essentially a very powerful concentrated point in the sky. And any planets close to the galactic center or placements or points are going to become more dominant energies. Her moon is close to the great attractor, also a very important point in the cosmos. And so this brings with it a very strong person with a lot of magnetism, a great force within her, a great will within her, but the ability, just like the great attractor, the ability to attract very powerful people, places, things, and situations. And that was part of what she brought to this bond. Her moon is almost exactly trine his south node, sextile his north node. So again, we see these powerful past life connections playing out. Whitney Houston and Bobby Brown, right? Another very powerful couple we want to look at. Very famously, they had a rocky relationship. This is a more recent relationship. They did a lot of drugs together. Whitney Houston felt very connected to Bobby Brown on the level of her feeling as if her own insecurities around not belonging, in particular to her own ethnic community, he brought healing to that. And she spoke about that in interviews. But what really bonded them together was their drug use. And they had a tumultuous relationship. They ended their relationship. And after that, she died of a drug overdose in a hotel. And about a year or two later, her daughter died in a very similar manner as well, which was the daughter they had together died. So that was very tragic as well. So we look at the bond these two people have. Now, one of the first things I notice is Saturn, Bobby Brown's Saturn in Whitney's first house. And that Saturn right on top of her Moon-Jupiter conjunction. Now, she already had a Pisces ascendant and Jupiter in the first house conjunct the moon. This is somebody who would be lush, right? Who would want and likely be attracted to some escapist tendencies. Now, there are other ways to use that energy, absolutely. I mean, this could be a person very imaginative, very gifted in music, very creative, very connected to a spirit of luck, very aware of their own magnetism, their own power, and confidence. However, we saw that Whitney manifested this energy in a different way in terms of her addiction. And so what do we have here? We have here his Saturn on her Jupiter moon. So that's the stability that he brought, right? That sense of roots, that sense of validation that he brought, helping her to feel more rooted in a community that she felt not always was accepting of her. And we also see here, look at this, we see his Jupiter on her Mars, right? Her Mars is in a wide opposition to her moon, so she already had a lot of passion within her. But we see his Jupiter on her Mars, so the physical attraction, the physical draw would have felt very strong. Uranus on her Mars, sometimes perhaps her attraction could be erratic, sometimes it could be anger. So she sort of brought forward, and he and her interactions, his interactions with her, brought her Mars forward in all kinds of ways. I mean, they might have been people who ran very hot and cold, especially where it came to attraction, where it came to sex. Maybe sometimes fighting was foreplay. So that could be some of the energy that we see here. Now look at this as well, her Pluto on his moon, right? He already is a powerful person with his Pluto moon conjunction in his chart. Her moon so close, his moon so close to her Pluto is magnifying that Plutonian energy that much more. And so she really must have felt like the one with the power. You add to this her Saturn on his sun. So it has been well documented, this sense of Whitney trying to downplay herself a little bit because she was the much bigger star. I mean, Bobby Brown certainly was very successful and a star in his own right, but Whitney Houston was a superstar, a global phenomenon. And he must have felt burdened by that at times. It must have felt like she had a lot more power than he had at times. And he might have felt like she wasn't very fair to him at times as well. With that Pluto on his moon, or so close to his moon, it can feel to the moon person like that Pluto person is so larger than life, or is the one holding all the cards. In some cases, might be manipulative of the moon person. So those can be some dynamics that do and could play out. But for all that, they did really try. They did really try to stick it out. They had a song that said, they said it wouldn't last, we had to prove them wrong. That's all that Saturn energy, right? Very powerful Saturn conjunctions here. His Saturn to her moon, her Saturn to his sun. I mean, that in and of itself suggests very powerful energy. Oprah and Stedman. Okay, so when Oprah met Stedman many years ago, back in the 80s, he was working as a corrections officer. He was kind of sick of his work and his job. He met Oprah. He made his move. They started dating. He got a lot of flack, and so did she. People felt that he was a lot more good looking than her. I mean, this was horrible things that people were saying, right, at the time. They questioned his manhood for wanting to be with her. But he really was that stead man. He was that steady force in her life. So after they met, she hired him as part of her companies, and he ended up creating his own companies, his own sports management companies. He wrote books and all of that. So he did sort of carve his own way for a while. I think he might still work for some of Oprah's charities as well. But for the most part, he is that Stedman, that steady man, to a very, very brightly shining billionaire of a woman. And he's been there in her life for so long and for so many years. She talks about the support she feels from him. She talks about the friendship she feels from him. Now, they were briefly engaged. I believe it was the 90s. I remember her talking about it on her show. I watched all 25 seasons. And there was a point where she was showing her engagement ring, and she looked really uncomfortable showing her engagement ring. Anyways, they ended up deciding not to marry. And there was a lot of speculation as to why. But Oprah is very proud to be her own woman in this lifetime. And Stedman steadily supports her. So let's look at some of the energies here, okay? We have got his Chiron mighty close to her ascendant. Now, that can bring with it feelings of vulnerability, especially related to appearance and who you are. And that was part of the early stages of their relationship, where people were saying that he's using her and people were saying that he's a lot better looking than her. That was a part of what would have awakened, but she owned that energy and moved towards healing for herself, which is very powerful. You look here, his moon on her part of fortune. Now, that is the blessings she brought to him in so many ways. I'm sure that he feels very happy and very connected to her as well. You look at all these planets he has in her third house, and you add to this, she's got all these air placements as well. She's got a grand trine in air. This is a person who needs to have people in their life that they can talk to. They really have an intellectual gift, but they understand themselves that much more when they're able to talk it out. And he, with all those placements in her third house, is able to be that person that she can really talk to. Now, she has Uranus in her seventh house. She's already going to do relationships her way. His Uranus is only magnifying that much more. Now let's look at Saturn, because it is Oprah's Saturn that is conjunct Stedman's ascendant, and that brings with it stability. He must have felt like she represented stability and fidelity and commitment. He must have felt more steady within himself, having met her. We look at Stedman's Saturn, and his Saturn is speaking with Venus, sort of a very wide trine we see to her Venus. We do see an aspect of a square, not a true square, because technically his Saturn is at 0 degrees and 1 minute of Libra, but by degrees it certainly is in a square formation to her ascendant and therefore her descendant as well. And so what commitment is and how to work through that, and what sacrifice is worth it and what isn't to move towards commitment, very likely was part of what she was considering. So it's not surprising that with his Saturn squaring her ascendant and descendant, she really had to consider very deeply what commitment was going to look like. With his Uranus and his Lilith in her seventh house, she was going to be inspired to go her own way. Chances are somebody with Lilith, now think of Lilith again. Lilith is not one of the major planets that we look at. However, Lilith can be very powerful when we look at Synastry, because she represents, or the placement represents, strong, independent females. And so he's got his Lilith, it's almost exactly conjunct his Uranus. So he has his very own ideas about what type of woman he wants to be with. And he very likely wants to be with someone who's ahead of her time, or represents change, and represents this very deep type of power, female power, if you will. I'm sure, even though she's talked over the years about her weight and how that affected her relationship, I'm sure that was not really a factor in terms of his attraction to her. She's already somebody with a very dominant Lilith, so placed high up there, so close to her midheaven. David Beckham and Victoria Beckham. So David Beckham is in the inner ring. We have Victoria Beckham in the outer ring. Very famously, the story goes that David Beckham was an athlete, a star in his own right. Victoria Beckham was with the Spice Girls, a star in her own right. He was in a hotel room watching a music show, and he saw a video of the Spice Girls. He saw Victoria Beckham, and he says that instantly he knew he was going to marry her. Now, he's also joked and said that that might not have been the very first thing he thought, but he knew that this was going to be for him. He pursued her. They got married. They have a bunch of kids. They've been together for a really long time. Together, they have become a very powerful couple. So they are this shining example of the power couple, if you will. So let's look at what's happening here. I noticed very interesting connections. Both of them have each other's Venuses conjunct each other's Mars. That is a very powerful combination for attraction and for physical attraction, for feeling attracted to this person, but also feeling like this person finds you attractive. And so both of them share that. Now look at what's happening with Saturn in their respective charts. Victoria Beckham has Saturn conjunct Mars natally in her chart. So she is going to be somebody who is attracted to power, is attracted to stability, is not likely to be willy-nilly with whom it is that she's attracted to, whom it is that she chooses to be intimate with. We also have here David Beckham's Saturn conjunct the ascendant of Victoria Beckham. So he brought stability into her life. So she must have felt when she met him that she could commit to him, ready to commit to him, wanted to commit to him. So we see that bond happening very powerfully so. Now add another element here, Victoria Beckham's South Node conjunct David Beckham's Venus. That is a very powerful karmic connection. Past life lovers is what we see with the two of them here. Consider some of these other nodal connections as well. We have Victoria's vertex on David Beckham's North Node. And the vertex is a powerful chart point. When someone activates your vertex or vice versa, it's like they pull you into a vortex. That's how I understand it. It's like been conceptualized as a combination between the North Node and the Ascendant. That's another way to look at it. But really, I think it's a powerful feeling. And it's a sense of you entering another world with this person. Now, whether that's just for the time that you're with them or that you move to another level, all of that can be indicated by the vertex. And so we see here that sense of him being pulled towards her is indicated by the fact that her vertex is mighty close to his North Node as well. Now, Meghan and Harry. Meghan and Harry, here's the thing. Going back to the example I gave earlier of John Lennon and Yoko Ono, Harry, of course, was a prince. He already wanted out of that life. He was already feeling it. And that is part of why he was attracted to Meghan Markle, because she represented a completely different world and a completely different life. If he wanted to stay in that life as a prince, well, he had lots of options. He dated for years people in his circle, but it was with Meghan, he met her, and very quickly things started moving towards greater stability. They got engaged, they got married, now they have 2 children. They live in California now as well. And so he decided that he didn't want to be part of the whole British royal family machine. There are people who put it all on her. I think he knew exactly what he was doing when he was attracted to her. He was ready. Now look at these charts here. Look at how Meghan is activating Harry's chart. We have here Harry's South Node. Okay, see his South Node in the 10th house? What's happening there? We've got Meghan's Uranus and her Lilith mighty close to that South Node. So he must have felt her like an electricity. He must have felt that she was this incredible, empowered, independent woman, and he was so drawn to her because of that. And so she definitely was an awakening for him, and also a pathway to change, right? She certainly helped him to make big changes in his life. Now look at his North Node. Her part of fortune on his North Node. That is very powerful for feeling a real sense of connection with this person. Now, part of fortune can be prosperity that is practical, that is financial, but also emotional prosperity, spiritual prosperity. And I'm sure he feels all that with her. When they left the royal family officially, they've made all kinds of deals, like with Netflix and things, and they, you know, are certainly totally fine where it comes to money. I remember when they left, there was all this debate about, especially in Canada, because they bought a house in Canada, and it was like, because I'm Canadian, and they were saying, oh, we shouldn't support them, we shouldn't pay for them. They don't need anybody to pay for them. They are just fine. He's making a lot of money and moving towards even more with his alliance with her, and her as well. Look at the fact that we have Harry's part of fortune on Meghan's Venus. So again, we have understanding, we have an awakening of love, but also an awakening of practical prosperity as well. Now let's look at what Saturn is doing here. So we see here with Saturn, not big, huge conjunction energies, really, right? We see here Meghan's Saturn is trine Harry's Chiron. We see that her Saturn is in a somewhat wide square to his ascendant. Other than that, are we seeing big personal planet connections? Not really. Her Saturn is squaring his Jupiter, kind of an outer planet thing. And yet it isn't that energy necessarily, although that's part of it. I'm sure he considered very deeply what it would mean to commit to her, what changes would come about, what resistance might be there. And he embraced it. He felt like he wanted to embrace it. Now for Meghan, we see Harry's Saturn trine her Mars. So she was absolutely committed and in it to be deeply committed to him. And that may be part of what helps to hold the two of them together. We see other powerful energies here as well. We see Harry's Saturn squaring her Sun. So she must have had to become aware of what commitment to him would actually mean. And she's spoken at length about how hard it was for her, all the media attention and being a part of that whole royal family, how challenging she found the whole thing, and how the two of them then decided that they were not going to stay in that situation, and that instead they were going to go in a different direction. So some of that heaviness of Saturn showed up for her in terms of her feeling like she couldn't really be herself or shine her light in a way that felt like natural and right for her. And yet they ended up figuring out how to work with that energy and move forward from there. And finally, we have Beyonce and Jay-Z. This is a very powerful bond, without a doubt. Now, already Beyonce, who's the center ring, is a powerful woman, is a very powerful woman. Look at that Pluto smack dab on her ascendant. She is somebody with a lot of personal control, but also personal magnetism. We have got Jay-Z with his Jupiter mighty close to her ascendant, mighty close to her Pluto, magnifying that much more, magnifying the intense attraction factor she has, but also helping her to feel more optimistic. That's part of their bond. Now consider as well, she's got a lot of 12th house energy. We've got Jay-Z activating her 12th house as well. Sometimes that can indicate a very powerful soul energy, soulmate energy. And I'm sure that both of them felt that very strongly. But consider as well that Jay-Z has been open about his infidelity and how much it hurt him to know that he hurt his wife because of that. And so sometimes the 12th house having to do with, the things that we aren't always aware of or that we become aware of, the ways in which self-undoing can happen. Well, some of that can be indicated by what's happening in Beyonce's 12th house. We see here Jay-Z's Saturn in her 7th house. So she was open to that sense of commitment and that depth of commitment that she has with him. We also see her Saturn aspecting his Sun by sextile. And so that is feeling a sense of, yeah, I could commit to this person, taking steps to commit and experiencing benefits. The truth is, the two of them together certainly amplified each other's energies as well. They are also a very famous power couple in their own right. Look at the fact that Beyonce's sun is on Jay-Z's South Node. He must have felt a very powerful past life connection to her. You look at his Lilith on her North Node, and she would have become very empowered as a woman in her own right as a result of meeting and moving towards relationship with Jay-Z. And thank you. Thank you so much. I know that we covered a lot of ground. We touched on planets for sure. We spent quite a bit of time looking at celebrity charts as well. But I hope this gets you started, gets you curious, gets you open to what Synastry astrology is and how it is that you can start to apply it and integrate it into your own life as well. And thank you. Thank you again to the one and only Stormie Grace. I love Stormie Grace so very much. I'm so proud of all her successes. She absolutely deserves it. And thank you, Stormie, for seeing me as part of your vision of this very special project of the YouTube Astrology Academy. And thank you, everybody out there, once again. And you can find me online. And until we connect again, take care.